Thank you very much, Mr. Vansilalom, Deputy Secretary General of LSCO, for your opening speech. Now we would like to proceed with our first presentation. So Dr. Bandit Nijataorn, who is a very well-known economist, will be presenting to us today. We are very lucky to have him with us. And I know most of you know already him, but if you haven't met him before, Dr. Bandit was the deputy governor at the Bank of Thailand. He left Bank of Thailand in 2010, and he joined Thai IOD Institute of Directors as the president and CEO of the Thai IOD from 2011 to 2018. He was also the chairman of the Thai Bond Market Association from 2011 to 14. Such an impressive background. Currently, he is the visiting professor at Hitotsubashi University, Tokyo, Japan, and he is a member of the Council of Trustees and the Board of Directors of Thailand Development Research Institute, and chairman of the Foundation for Public Policy and Good Governance in Bangkok. The floor is yours, Dr. Bandit. Thank you. Dr. Bandit, can you hear us?
Sorry.
Now we can hear you. Dr. Bandit, I believe you are muted. Could you please unmute yourself?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. Well, let me begin by saying good morning to all, and I would like to thank the IFC for the invitation to join today's webinar. I think the use of technology so far can bring us more closer together than we realize. And my hello to everyone attending today's webinar, wherever you may be. But first thing first, let me congratulate the Laos Securities Commission for co-hosting the webinar, and also for your efforts and determination to develop the country's capital market. Co-hosting this webinar today is with the IFC. I think is another example of the strong effort that you are making along this line. Because time is quite limited, I think I would like to focus my remarks maybe on just 3 issues. The first one is the importance of corporate governance as we see it in the ASEAN region, especially at this time of a global pandemic. And also, I want to talk about the tools that the authority can use in ASEAN to promote better governance amongst the listed company. And also one of which is the ASEAN CG Scorecard. And the third is, of course, the ASEAN CG Scorecard itself that I want to talk about, and what it can do, and also the benefit that companies can derive from it. I have given the PowerPoint, so if you just bring up on page number, have been the most active period for corporate governance around the world. And it was sparked by the global financial crisis of 2008 and the recognition that governance failures of companies had been one of the major contributing factor. So as a result, since 2008, there has been a change in the global governance landscape. One of the changes has been the fact that there has been a shift of focus of corporate governance from shareholders to stakeholders. And so over the last 10 years or so, reflecting this, we see all the key players in corporate governance ecosystem have become much more active, including in our ASEAN region. We see policymakers and regulators pushing for enhanced board transparencies. We see more emphasis are being put on the importance of outside representation on the board. And also increasing demand for director accountability, as well as the regulators providing more space for greater voice of minority shareholders over the critical boardroom issues. And also we see investors becoming more active with increased appetite for broad and deep governance changes, while the listed company have, can you turn to page 3, please? Thank you. While the listed companies have responded well to this call for better governance, we see companies increasingly see corporate governance as a competitive issue, and that companies are recognizing that better governance can lead to better business and also longer term sustainability. But closer to home now, I think the values of good corporate governance is clearly demonstrated in the current COVID-19 crisis. First, I think the crisis clearly shows the importance of business sustainability when things go wrong or when we are full of uncertainty. It also showed the importance of stakeholders to companies and the need for companies to pay attention to the stakeholders, especially the supply chains, the employees, and also the customers. We also see the importance of capital allocation in this crisis, as it's defined the company's ability to respond to the crisis in terms of having adequate financial buffer and savings. Also, the importance of the company being resilient and agile in its response to the unexpected events. So all this, I think, underlines the importance of having good corporate governance as the foundation for making better decisions and for making better choices. Next, please. Next page. To make progress on corporate governance, I think it is really a joint effort between both regulators and companies. Companies must embrace the benefits of good corporate governance, while regulators must stand behind it and totally support it. In most ASEAN countries, we see 3 groups of tools that have been used to promote better corporate governance. The first group is the CG best practices and guidelines. This is to allow companies to see what is involved and what is expected of them in terms of good corporate governance practices. This guideline can be developed domestically to suit local conditions, or simply to use the available international standards like the one by the OECD and the ICGN. Then the second groups of tools, we have policy and practices, meaning putting in place key policies and processes that mirror the adoption of CG standards by companies. These typically include companies' governance structures, its policies and processes, and also its public data disclosure system. And then the last one is assessments and review. This is to monitor actual practices of corporate governance principled by companies, as well as to monitor the progress. The assessment can be done by local governance body, just like the one that the Laos Securities Commission is doing in terms of developing its own scorecard. Or it can be done by a regional body like the ACMF through the use of the ASEAN CG Scorecard, or by a third party private sector agencies that provide services to international investors. A good example of this would be the CG Watch report by the ASEAN Corporate Governance Association. So all these examples of what have been done, and all this have happening in the ASEAN capital markets. Next, please. Can you turn the next page? The ASEAN CG Scorecard itself is, I would say, one of the most recognized benchmarks for the region's corporate governance assessment. The assessment was initiated by the ACMF in 2012 to promote ASEAN equities as an asset class. The scorecard is based on the OECD 5CG principle, and to date, I think 6 ASEAN countries have participated in the project, involving something like 550 listed companies throughout the 6 ASEAN capital market. The assessment is based on publicly available information, and up to 2018, when I was last involved, the overall score of countries, names of top 5 companies, names of top 50 companies, including the most improved companies, the names were announced. Now, the latest 2020 result have just been announced a few days ago, and it is also based on the same methodologies that I mentioned. But this year, the announcement focused on the top 20 companies of ASEAN, and also what they call the ASEAN asset class company, meaning those companies that score 25% or higher of the total possible scorecard score. And the top 3 companies of each countries are also announced. So these are the list of who appears on this list are now available in the ACMF website. Can you turn to the next page? Can we turn to the next page, please? Next. The ASEAN CG Scorecard from 2012 to 2018 are shown here. And you can see that it's involved countries like Singapore, Malaysia, the Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand, and Vietnam. The same 6 countries now also just participated in this year's exercise. Next page, please. So the question is, why do we do it? I think a simple answer would be that we do it because there are clear benefits from participating in the ASEAN CG Scorecard exercise. First, the scorecard itself is an important CG benchmark for the region. It is our own ASEAN product that has been developed to promote good corporate governance among the ASEAN listed company. So to be a part of it is really a must, and as well as an obligation for companies to do so. And second, I think the exercise keeps our companies informed of their performance with respect to the region's CG standards. And this can be a powerful push for them to do better from a competitiveness point of view. And I thought the third reason, I think it can also be a powerful fillip for gaining trust and interest of international investors, while opening up opportunity for ASEAN equities to be a truly international asset class. The latest 2020 result that I just mentioned shows that the region corporate governance performance continue to make good progress, and the improvements are seen across all the 6 markets of ASEAN that participated in the exercise. So I think this is a very good news. Okay, just let me stop here and thank you very much again for the invitation, and I hope that this brief presentation has been useful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bandit, for this insightful presentation. Now we would like to move on to our panel discussion. So Ms. Ada and Ms. Ralitza will be joining Dr. Bandit for the discussions. So let me give a quick background about Ms. Ada and Ms. Ralitza. So Ms. Ada has over 20 years of experience in capital markets, investment, and banking in Thailand. And during that time, she led teams of financial institutions, banking relationship, capital market, marketing and sales at ABN AMRO Bank, HSBC, the Royal Bank of Scotland. She's currently a director and audit committee member of Sukhumvit Asset Management Company. She's again a director and audit committee member of Thai Reinsurance Public Company, Investment and Advisory Committee, the Thai Red Cross Society, Director of Foundation for Public Policy and Good Governance, and she's advisor to IFC as well as to Twin Group. Our second panelist would be Ralitza Germanova. She's my colleague from ESG, Environment, Social and Governance Department. Ralitza is based in Washington, but because of the COVID-19 situation, she's now stuck in Europe for a few months now. Ralitza has more than 20 years of experience working with regulators, stock exchanges, partner institutions, and of course, private sector companies, basically all over the world, from Europe to MENA, Central Asia, Africa, Asia, and Pacific. And she's leading the IFC practice group on corporate governance codes, standards, and ESG disclosure and transparency. And she works on development of knowledge tools and solutions in this area. She is the architect and one of the principal authors of the Beyond the Balance Sheet IFC Disclosure and Transparency Toolkit. So Ralitza, it's great to see you. I'm happy that you managed to join us. I know that it is quite early there. So I would like to start asking my questions. So Ralitza, maybe we can start with the basics, and we would like to hear from your own words basically, what is corporate governance scorecard and what is the purpose of developing a CG scorecard? What benefits companies will derive from this? And also, I know that you are working in smaller markets as well as very well developed markets all around the world. So my second question would be, do smaller markets, maybe like Laos, also need a corporate governance scorecard, or is it only for big markets? And how can a corporate governance scorecard benefit smaller developing countries such as Laos with, again, a small number of listed companies for the time being? And based on your experience in developing corporate governance scorecards, can you please share with us some lessons learned in terms of developing and implementing CG scorecards in markets such as Laos? And what do we need to work on first? Where do we start? How do we start? And considering that CG is relatively a new concept in Laos, how can we ensure the CG scorecard doesn't become another compliance burden for companies? I know that you have a presentation for us. Yes.
Share the presentation. Can you see the presentation?
Yes,
And can you hear me?
We can see. We can hear you well as well.
Thank you so much, Leal, and good morning to everyone. It's a pleasure for me to join you this morning and share my experience from around the world. Corporate governance scorecards are a topic which is close to my heart because 12 years ago, this was the first project that I worked on in ISC in my home country, Bulgaria. As Dr. Bandit said, scorecards are a tool that has been used for a while around the world. The origin is in Germany in the 80s with the main purpose of providing information to investors. And I had worked with Mr. Christian Strenger, one of the first people that developed the scorecard in Germany. And after that, scorecards as an assessment tool has been done with the help of OECD, World Bank, IFC around the world. With our own support, around 30 scorecards have been developed in the world. And in 2016, we also developed a toolkit, a guidance based on our experience, which has lessons learned and step-by-step guidance on how to develop such tools, which you can find on our on our website, the ISC.org Corporate Governance. One important thing to think when you start developing scorecard is that really there is not one size fits all. It's very important to have into consideration the local environment that the local environment in the country itself and the legislation. The scorecard is based on a benchmark. Very often, this is a benchmark for good corporate governance. Very often, this is the corporate governance code in the country. And this is a tool that can help implementation and observe the implementation of a corporate governance code practices. Here are some of the regions that we have worked developing scorecards. As you see, some are bigger countries, some are smaller, and I will share the lessons learned from these projects. The benefits of scorecards, which initially started just on corporate governance, but as Dr. Bandit said, the field of corporate governance is expanding, including as well the governance of environmental and social issues. That's why the scorecards as well as corporate governance code are expanding to include these issues. The benefit are different for the different users of scorecards. For a regulator who is developing and putting this tool to the market, this is a tool that generates information on the quality of corporate governance, and it gives you comparable information that you can compare between different years. It can help measure how effective the regulation and the oversights are, where the gaps are in such regulation, in order in the years to come to fill these gaps with either guidances, amendments in these regulations as well. And it very importantly generates data over time. As it was mentioned, this is a tool that we found that it's also very beneficial for companies themselves. And this was one of the convening questions and convening answers for companies. How to convince them that this is not a burden for them. This was actually a tool that was helping them to do their own self-assessments of practices and improvements internally of environmental, social, and governance practices, identify where they're weak, and conduct a rigorous check. And also, this is a communication tool that can help and improve the communication between the board and management on certain issues. Because one of the big lessons learned in the first scorecard that we developed in Bulgaria was that the information will have to be verified, not just by the person that fills the scorecard, but by the CEO, by the board, by the chief financial officer, and the relevant board committees. And this is also provides good information to stakeholders, some of the affected communities, the customers as well, because some regulators, like I'll say in Nigeria, for example, this scorecard is used as a tool to publish information on corporate governance. Scorecard, the development of a scorecard, it's not just the tool, it's actually a project. It includes the development of the tool. It includes the engagement with the stakeholders, with the companies, preparing them for the tool. It includes the implementation as well from the regulator side, collecting the information, assessing the information, and it includes as well what to do with the information after you have it. Publishing a report, developing an awards based of this as well. So the first thing is to be clear on what exactly is the aim of the scorecard itself: to raise awareness on corporate governance, to encourage the companies to adopt good practices and educate and build their capacity, to identify gaps or lack of clarity in the regulation, to facilitate investments, to enable comparison, or to promote regional integration. And if there is a plan to, because the scorecards as the codes are dynamic tools, they can be changed and they should be changed as the market grows and develops, and the companies are also becoming better in their practices. You should have a plan. What are your goals, maybe in the next 2 or 3 years with the scorecard itself? That's why it helps to have an implementation plan from the beginning, which includes the different phases in the scorecard, to discuss what are the goals, to gain the stakeholders and the understanding and the buy-in from companies through engagement with them during the development process of the scorecard. So it's not something that they get surprised with, and it's not something that they view as a burden, but they are engaged in the process, both the companies and the other stakeholders and associations in the market, establishing the benchmark, determining the approach of the scorecard. It can be either a company self-assessment or an independent assessment by a third party, as Dr. Bandit says. Determining the type of companies to focus. We are working in Rwanda. Rwanda has 9 listed companies at the moment. That's why they're going to encourage as well the non-listed companies to use the scorecard as a tool. Developing the structure of the scorecard itself in terms of how many parameters to include, the number of questions. Very often, in order to give a full picture of different issues, the questions are quite a lot, between 70 to 100 questions. But depending on the size of the market, there should be discussion what are the priority areas and the priority questions as well, what should be the weighting in such areas, and as I said, how the information will be verified. When we started these scorecards, very often they were in Excel spreadsheets, but the web-based ones, India did an excellent web-based scorecards is an approach that is gaining traction. And the phase 2 is extremely important, including the training, both of the organization which is going to develop, monitor, and implement the scorecard, and the market itself. And then having in the beginning a pilot test with a few companies to test the approach and refine and conduct the assessment, and also think beyond the scorecards, law improvements, award, and what to do. Here's an example of a very successful scorecard in a small and very challenging market in Palestine. The scoring methodology is simple. It's based on the scorecard itself. It has 5 areas: the commitment to corporate governance, rights of shareholders, disclosure and transparency, board responsibility, and risk management and control. Each area is factored differently based on the market. Specifics for the codes in the Middle East is that very often they have a combination of mandatory and voluntary provisions. Voluntary provisions are so-called good practices, or practices that are quite advanced, because both the code and the scorecards are inspirational tool as well to improve the market there. This is how the scorecard looks like. The number, the weighting here is in three areas, 3 answers: yes, partially, and no. There was a very elaborate process for developing and testing, including consultations with stakeholders and workshops and training, evaluation the outcomes from different users and sectors, then pilot implementation, and then launch of the scorecard itself. And this is how the weighting and the scores looked into the different sections. And based on that, the Capital Market Authority in Palestine did improvements in the laws and gradually changed the weighting percentage between the different main areas as the practices improved on the board and disclosure and transparency. A lesson learned from this project was the importance of implementation strategy. Having for the application of the scorecard is not just a tool that you put on the market and you forget about it. You need to know how you are planning to implement. You need to have a plan for trainings as well, trainings for the companies, sensitization of the public itself. In the latest years, development of a guide to filling the scorecards in the smaller markets here in the Balkans. The stock exchange or regulator in the first years even had discussions with the companies one-on-one to explain what they mean by the different questions. and availability of a help desk and self-assessment. This is a scorecard that we just finished for Rwanda. Here we started including as well some relevant guidance in the scorecard itself, meaning which provisions from the code, which is quite extensive, it references what exactly it means. Then we find from our experience that a system with 3 points usually gives a comprehensive assessment. That's why here we use good, fair, or need improvement, insufficient practices. And we include the source of the response and the information. Where can this information be found? In the annual report, in the website, which particular internal regulation as well. Interaction between the company and the regulator before, during, and after the rating process is important. The period of review and time of filling. This usually is the same as the financial year. The evidence and the source is extremely important to have and to know where you can find this information, what is the evidence for it. And also encourage the companies themselves and explain how they can use the information internally to improve their own practices. The company sign off on scorecard content. It should be part of the scorecard itself. And a requirement when it is provided to the regulator, who should be trained as well and should have a dedicated team with members from different departments who should assess the scorecards. What we did in Kenya is we never had one person assessing one company. Staff was trained to assess one particular parameter across different companies in order to have independent view. The Securities and Exchange Commission in Nigeria took a different approach. They substituted their Form 1 on corporate governance information with a scorecard. It was mandated by the Securities and Exchange Commission and submitted annually as a report on corporate governance. And they also had quite a lot of a program with a lot of trainings per year. Kenya did a similar thing, and they make an event around publishing the report with benchmarks based on the scorecards. It's summarized report, not including particular not information for companies one-on-one. And the scorecard is an important element in the entire system of corporate governance in the country, with laws, codes, and then some guidance and review process. Leal, I'm cautious of time, so I'll give back the floor to you and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Eliza. Maybe we can accept questions after hearing from Ada and Dr. Bandit as well. So I just want to move on to our second panelist, Ms. Ada. So Ada, as we know, we are sitting on a number of boards. You are also a board member for one of the listed companies in Thailand. So from your experience as a board member, what are your views on CG Scorecard? And in your opinion, is it useful or is it burdensome? And also, how has CG Scorecard helped you to understand your company's own corporate governance practices? Have you made some changes within your company's organizations to align your governance standards and practices with the scorecard requirements? If yes, can you give us some examples? And also finally, if you compare your company with other companies' CG scorecard results, so as a board member, do you feel discouraged or encouraged when you see that maybe your peers are doing much better than your company on the scorecard? So it would be great if you could share your feedback on this. Thank you, Ada.
Thank you very much, Leo. And first of all, it's very delighted for me to be in touch back to the colleagues in Laos again. During our time at the Thai IOD, Dr. Bandit and I actually visited Laos a few times to share our experiences from Thailand. And it's very encouraging indeed to see Laos making a good progress and will possibly be ready for adoption of the scorecard soon. So welcome to the journey. As a board member, I think for most companies, especially at the beginning of the CG adoption process, the concept of CG itself can be very fluffy and very daunting. Most people would not know what to do and perceive it as Larissa says, burdensome, and it becomes a compliance matter, right? But from our experience, what I would like to encourage board members to see a CG scorecard is to turn it around and use it as a toolkit. So it's going to be a toolkit to actually transform the operation of the company from just an ordinary company into a professionally run company. And secondly, what it does is to help you in transforming a family-controlled company, especially in this part of the world or globally. Most companies will start off as a family company, right? So the journey to transform it from a family-controlled company into a family-owned public company can be helped by the adoption of the scorecard. What I mean by the family-owned public company is when possibly maybe the company will be listed in the future. So you will have the combination of minority shareholders, retail investors, institutional investors. Or if you're not ready to become a listed company, but certainly looking for financial partner, the investors, the likes of the private equity investors can join you in owning the company. And in a sense, you become a family-owned company with additional partners. So the use of the scorecard can be a toolkit to accompany along the journey. So my question is, so what does the scorecard do and who does it really help? So to me, the scorecard is serving everyone in the companies with the governance language. Everyone meaning from the top itself, the directors, the management of the company, the corporate secretary, and the tool to speak to the investors. So when we have a common language to communicate about your progress or where you are on the journey of governance, having a toolkit is actually a very powerful tool. It's helping you to communicate and help people in your company understand where we are heading, what progress we have made, and to help you to communicate externally as well to the regulators and also to the investors. Secondly, and most importantly, you want to make profit, right, as a company. So in the scorecard itself, especially in the section where it talks about the board responsibilities, it's spelling out the role of the board in creating performance, i.e. How the board should look into the strategy of the company. And equally as important to the strategy, it's how do you manage the risk in the company. So together, when you have the framework for the governance structure of the company, the role of the board in strategy, role of the board in the risk management of the company, altogether it is serving you as a tool to help guide the company for performance and also for compliance. Now, so who does it help, right? So I think it's really helping three groups of people. First of all, it's helping the individual of the company, right? It's helping the individual director. It's helping the employees, the staff, the management. And secondly, it's helping the company itself. And more importantly, it's helping also the ecosystem of the capital market, because once you know the progress of the corporate governance in the market, it's much easier for the regulators and the companies and the stakeholders to get together to talk about, okay, where do we go next? This is where we are. If we want to be, as Dr. Pandit say, now the ASEAN Scorecard is introducing a new category awards, which is the ASEAN Asset Class. The ASEAN Asset Class is really to help bring investment from global investors into the region. So once we know where we stand collectively as a country, as the region, we can really help build the strengths of our companies that perform, as well as having a good trustable corporate governance level of adoption in the region that makes it attractive to global investors. So it helps the individual, it helps the company, and it also helps the capital market. So if I may go back on how does it help the individual in the company, right? If you are a new director, for example, when I joined a company as a new board of director, for a company that has a good practice of corporate governance guided by the scorecard, the board orientation, the board pack that they provide you with at the beginning is all very comprehensive and very structured. So you get all the information you need to start the road as a new director in the company. But if you are new into directorship altogether, and especially if the whole company is new into the adoption of corporate governance, these guidelines, right? We have 200 odd checklist in the scorecard itself, can really help guide the company in creating a CG compliance company. So you can take a look into each section of the scorecard. So it goes from the right of shareholders in the company, the equitable treatment of shareholders, the role of the stakeholders, the disclosure and transparency, and ultimately the board responsibilities. So you can take a look and at the beginning, perhaps you can prioritize on which from this checklist you would like to start off first. So it's forming a kind of roadmap for the adoption of the scorecard for the individual board members, the management, and the corporate secretary, right? For the company, it's to me, what the scorecard helps is actually the communication between the top level and the staff. Because if you have not been trained or been educated about role of the board, as a staff of the company, perhaps you see a board as a group of people who make decisions for the company who you never met, right? Some of the staff members may see the board as, okay, people who don't really understand the business of the company, and they come in and make decisions of the company. So the scorecard, I think, would help to create the communication channel. They would understand role of the boards better. They would understand the purpose and the benefit of having a corporate governance. And it really helps, when you speak the same language. So it goes back to my beginning statement that a scorecard is really a toolkit to promote the language of governance in the company, right? So that is personally what I find very, very helpful. You don't need to go and speak about the role of the board yourself to the employees necessarily, but through the scorecard, it's helping you with this journey. Secondly, it's really helped the corporate secretary, because to them, right, they basically run the actual formality of board meetings, and also they are looking after the report that goes into the board meeting, and also the reports that goes externally to the investor. So so by having a scorecard as a guidance, it's really helping our corporate secretaries to have an easier job, and they can plan out their year on the actions that they need to do as the anchor team for the corporate governance. As a young company who wants to walk along this journey, I think what is important is it's really helping on the strategy front to slowly transform the company from the strategy coming from the owner only to strategy coming from the diverse group of people at the board level, right? So we talk about the board should have diversity of skills and knowledge. So the burden of the strategy does not have to fall on the small group of people, i.e. the owners of the company, as it traditionally does, but to face or this disrupted world. So you have more brains to think and form the strategy for the company. And on the risk oversight point of view, it's helping you to understand the benefits of having a strong internal risk management system, having the internal auditor, as well as employing external auditors to help the owners and the board of companies sleep better at night from having external auditors coming in and help pinpointing the risk factor of the company. And ultimately, Liao, you asked about the peer pressure, right? So this is slowly in Thailand, if I share the experience from Thailand, when we started this scorecard 20 years ago, the actual score out of 100 of Thai companies were at 50. And most of the Thai companies were probably seeing this as a compliance, a burden. You know, we need to follow so many rules. We cannot act independently. We need to do so many things to get good scores. But over time, the adoption of the scorecard is embraced more and more by companies. And now the actual score for Thai companies improved from 50 when we started. Now it stands at 83, right? And Thai companies takes pride in taking this even further. Now we have 21 Thai companies being in the Dow DJ Sustainability Index. We have companies fighting to become the ASEAN asset class because they understand that by having good corporate governance score, they have more support from investors. In Thailand itself, the local asset management company sets up a CG funds. So they take the companies that have good star rating from the Thai IOD CGR scorecard and form a funds of company with good good CG score. So it's really making their efforts and struggle along the way worthwhile, right? The KPI of the management of the companies, of many companies that I know of, are based on the score. So if you see the peers being in the 5 stars category and you are not, that's not going to be good as a company, because I know that the companies would set this as a KPI for the corporate secretary and for the management of the company. So it's really having an actual impact on the individual company as well as the company itself when investors use the investment. Okay, so if I may just end the first round here.
Thank you very much, Ada. So regarding your last point, peer pressure, I would like to go back to Dr. Bandit. So Dr. Bandit, in Thailand, Thai IOD organizes the annual Board of the Year Awards, and also the Stock Exchange of Thailand, SET, organizes the Best SET Sustainability Awards. So you talk about the process a little bit, but can you explain a little bit more about this process? What are some of the standard criteria for the Board of the Year? Maybe you can give some examples, and how do you persuade companies to participate? And also, from your experience, do you think these types of competition help companies to improve their ESG practices, and how so? What are some maybe lessons learned from the best companies, and how can board make sure that their companies are not doing CG improvements as a window dressing exercise? Thank you.
Thank you, Liao. I think when we embark on the CG improvement process, rewards and recognition become something that you need to do, because I think rewards and recognition provide you with 2 good roles too. The first one is that it provides incentive for companies to get together and get themselves together, and then try to embark on this difficult journey of improving corporate governance. So it is a good way to energize and provide incentive for company to embark on and embrace the principle of good corporate governance. The second important role is that the rewards provide a sort of public recognition of the achievement of companies that have been recognized by the regulators and so on. So on the one hand, you're trying to encourage them to move forward. And the question is, what do we get out of this? Is it, this long-term improvement, and at the same time, it recognizes the efforts. So to me, rewards and recognition provide the companies with the way the companies can demonstrate to the investor, how they are practicing good corporate governance, and it is important, to justify the resources that a company put into this exercise. But most importantly, as Ada mentioned, that it bring in what I would call a unity of mind between the board of directors, right, who wants to the companies to be on a journey, and the management and the staff who need to execute and behave accordingly. So once the company gets certain rewards, it shows that the thing that we are doing, we are on the right track, and these efforts are being recognized by the investors and by the public in general. So this is one way to look at it. But I think come back to the questions of competition. I think really it gives the companies the sense of duties to the public, whether they are doing enough in terms of corporate governance compared to their peers. By mentioning peers, I don't mean any other companies, but I would refer to companies that are operating in the same industry, in the same market, right? Supposing you have two companies that are equally good in terms of their economic and business performance, but one is known for good governance and one is not known for good governance. So I think most investors would want to support good company with good performance and good governance. So this is sort of the peer pressure that it will lead to better governance by other companies in the same industry as well. Not so much competing, to get good score, but competing to make better business by better processes. Okay, so it's a question of how you decide the awards. You mentioned things that we do regarding the Board of the Year awards and so on. I think these are examples of that the authority can decide ways so that things that they wanted to promote or they want things to do better can actually be reviewed by very focused awards. In Thailand, we have awards for company on the issues of sustainability. We have the awards for company that do well on ESG, right? So this sort of different categories of award would allow companies to be good at certain things, to be recognized by the public. On the methodologies of the Board of the Year awards, it's really the offspring of what the CG scorecard is. I mean, for the CG scorecard, you might have a group of maybe 50 or 40 companies that that attain 5-star recognition or 4-star recognition. And from this group of companies, we want to answer the question, which company really have good practices in terms of their board functions and so on. Looking at the issue like strategies, risk management, compensations, and also in terms of how to manage the operation of the firm in general. So Board of the Year has two components. The first component is that those companies that are eligible to be enter into this exercise must have a certain high levels of CG score as reviewed by the CG scorecard. Okay, so if you're in the top 5, if you're in the top 5-star or the 4-star company, then you are automatically can enter into the exercise. So, but the score really just demonstrate the processes that you have on paper. The second component of the exercise would be to actually meet the board of directors of companies. We have a process of interview, okay, where a group of CG experts assembled by the IOD would go and meet the board of company and then we would have a way to ask the questions about what they actually do. So this is just to make sure that what they actually tell in terms of their annual report, in terms of what they do, are being reflected in the answers that the director actually give, right? So it's a question of combining both what we call form and substance together. So those companies that have done well in the sense of Board of the Year would be those companies that have high score in terms of the CG rating, and also have demonstrated their ability in answering questions and explaining things that we feel that they are actually on top of what they do. And I think these exercises are being done in many countries in the ASEAN region. The same, combining in interviews with CG Scorecard. So I would say that it is another level. And those companies who have been selected as being, with Board of the Years award, I think they're quite happy that both what the companies are doing and what they are doing at the board level really meet the expectation of the public. So this is my short answer to your questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pandit. And also thank you very much, Ms. Ada and Ms. Raliza, for such thoughtful discussions. Maybe now we can open up the floor for questions. I can see that there is one question. Actually, it's about the ASEAN CG Scorecard, if it is going to be changed to ASEAN ESG Scorecard. So I know that there are certain discussions around this, but Dr. Pandit, do you have any insight on that? If there is any concrete plan to transform the CG Scorecard in the future, maybe an ASEAN ESG Scorecard?
I think there are three issues here. First is whether an individual country could have their own scorecard as a starting point, okay? And then move into the ASEAN CG Scorecard. So this is the first question. The second question is whether the content of the ASEAN CG Scorecard can be better improved to embrace, right, more aspect of ESG. So that's the second possibility. And the third one, whether the ASEAN CG Scorecard should be totally revamped, right? So that it would focus totally on the ESG issues, okay? The difference between this one and the second option is that the second option continue to focus on the 5 principles of corporate governance, okay, of the OECD, but expand in detail a little bit more of the requirement that they are expected in terms of the ESG concept. But the third option I mentioned is to totally go for the ESG fully and adopt it as the new ASEAN CG Scorecard. Now, in my view, I think having your own CG Scorecard in the beginning is always useful, because you can begin very small and then expand the list of questions, okay, so that companies can become used to it. And at the same time, when you feel that you are ready, you can move into the ASEAN CG Scorecard. A country like Thailand would do both the ASEAN CG Scorecard and the CG own scorecard at the same time, okay? So in 1 year, based on the public information that companies provided, there will be 2 assessments, one on the country owned CG Scorecard and the other on the ASEAN CG Scorecard, because about maybe up to 20% of the content of both scorecards might not be similar, okay? Because the focuses could be different. And there are also countries in Asia that did not go for their own scorecard, but jumped totally into the ASEAN CG Scorecard. This is one way to do it, but it's there will be many gaps that companies in many countries would not be able to meet, because we are talking about top companies in Thailand, Singapore, and Malaysia, doing well on the other scorecard, but companies in other part of Asia or ASEAN might not be able to meet the demanding question from that ASEAN CG Scorecard. So I think this is something that the regulators might need to consider. But moving totally into the ESG scorecard, I think is something that we need to think about seriously of how, of what sort of benefit we are looking for from the ASEAN CG Scorecard itself. Are we looking at promoting better practices of company, or are we pushing companies towards a longer term sustainability issues? Okay, so I think there are 2 different focus. Again, this is something that the regulators and the experts we have to discuss. So to me, there are these three issues that we have to decide. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vandit. Okay, there is one question from the Laos Securities Commission office. Can you please explain in more details about the whole process of conducting CG assessment by using the CG scorecard? So, Raditza, are you still with us?
Yes, I am. Yes, I'm still with you.
Great. Could you please give us a bit more explanation maybe on the process for conducting CG assessments? You mentioned certain things, there were certain lessons learned. For instance, I believe you mentioned that you never use one person to conduct the entire assessment for one company, but the same person looks at certain questions across all companies to ensure consistency. Are there any other maybe lessons learned or tips you would like to share with LSCO?
Yes, the assessment part is very important, and I'm sure Adar and Dr. Bandit will share their experience. The first lesson learned that we have is, as I said, developing a team from different departments in the Securities and Exchange Commission. There should be a couple people that are quite good with statistics and doing different types of assessments. The second one is there should be spent enough time to train the staff in the Securities and Exchange Commission to on the assessment of the scorecard. The scorecard usually is an annual process. It's given to the companies. The set of questions are given to the companies, and they're collected once per year. When the information is collected by the Securities and Exchange Commission, then the assessment starts. And as I said, we found that it's quite useful if it's not one person assessing one full company, but specializing if there is the ASEAN Scorecard has 5 parameters, the others have 4, for example, or 6, depending on the benchmark that is used. So one staff member specializes either in board practices or disclosure and transparency, or shareholdings. The key here as well is the evidence for the information, and also to track back with the company. Sometimes companies do have these practices, but they do not disclose, or they do not put them because they were not sure that they're part of the question. So the first couple of years, that's why, as Dr. Bandit said, you can start with your own scorecard, a simpler one, to build the capacity of the companies to be able to disclose this information. And also will help in the beginning to have an outline of the report that you want to produce, or the summary that you want to produce in the end. So this will help you with the reporting process and piloting. I cannot stress how important is to have pilots in the beginning, and these should be companies which others will follow in the market. So that's from me, Leah.
Thank you very much, Rolisa. In the interest of time, I would like to move to the next question from BCL Bank. Is this scorecard prepared for separate industry group, or is it applicable to all industry groups? So maybe I can answer this question. So it is, the balanced scorecards normally are applicable to all different industry groups. based on your experience, what are the key challenges in implementing the assessment based on the scorecard? Key challenges. Maybe I can start with you, and Ms. Ada, you can jump in. Based on my experience, the key challenges is this, obviously this scorecard comes with a questionnaire, and sometimes companies' understanding of the same question may be different. The other challenge is in certain cases, companies may see this as a window dressing exercise. So there's a question in the balanced scorecard. It's asking if there's a policy. They can quickly draft a policy and disclose it. However, they may not implement the policy. That can be this kind of challenges. But let me say that, do you have any thoughts, feedbacks?
Yes,
thank you.
yes, that's true. We have faced this problem before where companies see it as, okay, what is the best way for us to score the most? So becomes cut and paste exercise rather than going to the actual benefit. But I think from the regulators' points of view, to make this work, it needs concerted effort from the stock exchange, the regulators, and the assessor itself. In Thailand, the Stock Exchange of Thailand actually commissioned the Thai IOD to conduct the assessment. The body of knowledge about the progress of corporate governance would be centralized at the Thai IOD, but with full support from the Thai Stock Exchange and the Security and Exchange Commission. Now, the difficulty is when we conduct the assessment exercise, we conduct it from the points of view as if we are a retail investor. So we are only using the publicly available information, right? So the assessment is not done from the lens of the company wanting as advisory service on how they could improve the corporate governance, but it's really in what you are communicating to the public. How is your governance score comparing to the others? So it becomes the disclosure from the company itself. And I think if you are going to design a new assessment, it's useful for this company to score well, make it easy to use. But the difficulty is really how we could score this, design the scorecard, so it would really make impact on the corporate governance journey of the company. So it's really looking beyond or the tick the box or the checklist or the cut and paste, and really trying to use this scorecard as the actual toolkit to improve the performance of a true governance improvement in the company.
Thank you very much, Ada. Larissa sent a quick note about the scorecards for banks. So I think during her presentation as well, she mentioned she prepared CG scorecards specifically for banks as well. So that's another option. We have another question from LSCO. Do you have sample guidelines, handbooks about how to conduct assessments of CG? So IFC has a toolkit actually on developing CG scorecards, and we will be more than happy to share that toolkit with LSCO after this webinar. Are there any other questions? Please use the chat box for your questions. Okay, we are coming to the end of our webinar today. So maybe before we end, I would like to highlight some key takeaways. Corporate governance is not a luxury for just few big multinational companies. Regulators and investors require good corporate governance. Companies of all sizes need good CG. The business case for good corporate governance is very clear. Good corporate governance promotes sustainable business growth in a private sector. And CG Scorecard is just one among many other ways in which companies can benchmark themselves with other companies and improve their CG practices. So just to close, we look forward to continuing to work closely with LSEO, Stock Exchange, and other partners in Laos to create the momentum to strengthen corporate governance among local companies even further. So I would like to thank everyone for joining us today, and we hope to see you at our next webinar. Thank you very much. Take care. Bye.